very much. Welcome, and thanks for being here tonight. I have a few housekeeping issues I need to take care of before we get started with the presentation. A few years ago, I wrote a very modest book on Alzheimer's disease, and there are chapters in this book that have to deal specifically with advanced healthcare directives. To make tonight's presentation informative but also enjoyable, at the very end you'll see a slide that's got my email address on it. So some of the concepts are probably a little difficult, at least at first blush. Don't worry about that. Enjoy yourself tonight. Try to get a general feel of the material and the message that I'm attempting to send. I will send you, I'll email to you the relevant portions of the book. I'll also email to you a complete set of the PowerPoint slides. And there's also, if you wish, this is also being recorded. So we can, thanks to the Moody Foundation and UTMB, I can also send to you this complete presentation. I want to make sure that you understand that what you'll see and hear tonight is a starting place for consultations that I hope you will have with your lawyer, your doctor, and if you're so inclined, your spiritual advisor. By no means is this anything more than an enhancement of the conversations you should be having with those professionals. So please keep that in mind. This isn't a replacement for those consultations with those professionals. It's an enhancement, and it's a means by which those consultations will be hopefully more fruitful. You're going to hear references tonight, quite a few of them, to the rejection of life-sustaining medical treatment. Now, if we can swing the calendar back to 1950, this really wasn't an issue, because in 1950 and before, everything that could be done to keep a patient alive generally was done, and in many instances it still wasn't enough. As science, particularly medical science, has improved, it's become more of an issue about whether a particular patient or that patient's family or whoever's making decisions on that patient's behalf has, quote, had enough, unquote, particularly with regard to life-sustaining medical treatment along the lines of what you would hear is tube feeding. Some of you who have attended earlier lectures in this series are probably asking yourself, now wait a minute, what's an advanced healthcare directive have to do with the brain? Well, many vital organs in the body are susceptible to repair and even replacement. Someday, perhaps, at least from a replacement standpoint, hopefully not, but from a repair standpoint, the brain may be more amenable to repair in another generation or so. But for the time being, brain injury, brain disease, illnesses that impact the brain don't lend themselves to the medicine that's applied to other organs. So for the moment, an advanced healthcare directive is the best practical means of mitigating, not eliminating, mitigating the consequences of brain injury. Some of the rest of you may also be asking yourself, your name is Gaido, and you're going to speak on healthcare directives? I would expect that if we came, you would be speaking on seafood. I admit it's a head scratcher, but life's kind of funny that way. Okay, I'm much more comfortable down here in the well, so that's where I'm going to be, and we'll start with the first slide. This is basically the question I'm hoping together we can answer tonight. And most important element here is, in my opinion, widely used legal documents may be insufficient for the task. Remember, if you choose, you're going to get all these slides and a lot more information. This is the first concept that we need to capture tonight, and it's called informed consent. If you choose to have me send a portion of the book I wrote, there's a really interesting chapter on the history in the United States of the legal aspects of medical care. And I picked 1950 randomly, but before 1950, certainly in the early part of that century, doctors weren't accustomed to asking for informed consent. You went to a doctor and the doctor told you, you're going to have an operation. No, I'm not going to give you this operation. Do these things, don't do these things. The law evolved, and it's a fun chapter to read. It's of the chapters in the book that I think you'll enjoy. You'll enjoy that one the most. But today, it's very different. You have the absolute right to reject any form of medical treatment. And in order for a doctor to provide medical treatment for you, he or she must obtain your informed consent. Big issue, informed consent. It's a pretty reasonable concept. The informed consent that the physician must obtain from you is pretty practical. It's the amount of information that a reasonable person would need to make a reasonable judgment about a particular medical treatment. But informed consent, and this is another big concept, informed consent is not possible without decisional capacity. So what advanced directives as a whole are trying to do is they're trying to provide a way for you, while you still possess decisional capacity, to give informed consent in advance. Now, most of you here tonight are likely going to have informed consent, the ability to give informed consent, and the ability to you will retain decisional capacity to your last breath. So I don't want you to think that all of us lose decisional capacity and the ability to give informed consent necessarily. But there is a significant number of individuals that do. And so what advanced directives are about playing it safe and informing those who need the information of your medical treatment and care wishes in advance. You'll hear from time to time the word competency thrown out. Well, competency is a legal term. Decisional capacity is a medical term. They're basically interchangeable. There's a lot written about the standards for the two, but there's general agreement that the standards are the same. So when you say, well, this person's incompetent to be able to give, to have decisional capacity, they're, as I said, interchangeable. One quick note, the legal aspect of competency is task specific. So when you say someone's incompetent, or a judge or a jury says that they're incompetent, they're saying they're incompetent for a specific task. So in this instance, decisional capacity is identical to competency when the competency is the ability to give informed consent, if that makes sense. Once again, the second, third, if you have the stomach for it, seeing these slides, it'll be a lot clearer. Once again, you have the undisputed right to give or withhold informed consent and do so in advance. This wasn't always the case in this country. This, as you will read, if you choose to read that one chapter, this was a hard-fought victory for the American consumer and the American patient. Effectively, and I know many of you have been to a lawyer, perhaps lawyers, some of you may be lawyers. Generally speaking, in Texas and in the United States today, there are two alternate methods of preserving your medical treatment decision-making authority. One, everyone calls this a living will. There's discussion as to how accurate that is, but for our purposes, let's work with it. This is a formal, written document saying unequivocally if possible, I give or withhold my consent. But it's only effective if you are no longer able to give decisional capacity. So if you lose consciousness, if you have a brain injury to where your decisional capacity is lost, that's generally where these documents come into play. Recognize that the next time you're in a situation where someone that you love is in a threatening position relative to their health and perhaps their life, these documents that you create or that were created for that person may never see the light of day. And that's a fundamental problem with them. And one of the things that the sequencing that I have in the chapters that are available to you talk about that. Because in most instances, the doctor is going to look to what he or she perceives as the next of kin. So as far as there being formalities of documents or whether or not the document finds its way into the file or the doctor's even interested in it, may not necessarily be a factor in the medical care your loved one or you are given or from whom it's withheld. So recognize if you create a document or documents, it's also up to you to make certain that the documents are unavoidably obtainable and right there for the doctor. You can't expect that if you keep them in the scar box at the house or in the safety deposit box at the bank, they're going to be any value to you. The second document frequently used is a durable power of attorney for health care. This is a different one. This is when you tell your spouse, one of your children, your best friend, I give to you my power of decision-making with regard to medical treatment and care. I'm so comfortable with you, your judgment, and your affection and respect for me, I know you'll make the right choice. And so in some instances, people say, well, I'm not going to worry with trying to sort out all the different possibilities of medical treatment and care. They just seem to be endless. Instead, I'm going to give that power to my spouse or someone that I trust. As we'll see a little further in this presentation, I'm not comfortable with that, and I'll explain when we get there. All 50 states have statutes that permit the creation of a durable power of attorney or a living will. Most states have both. And this is important. I just gave you the scenario where the doctor said, your spouse is we're going to have to make some difficult decisions here. And you need to tell me what it is you wish done on your spouse's behalf. Well, recognize that that's the way it usually works. But decisions have to be made regardless of whether there are documents that surface, regardless of who's available. So it should frighten you a bit that if evidence of a patient's previously made medical treatment decisions are inadequate or non-existent, then there are other ways of extrapolating from the information available what that patient would want. You really don't want this, because when you leave it open for other people to make decisions on your behalf without sufficient guidance, this is a rocky road to ruin. So substitute judgment is the first. It's pretty practical. It's trying to find facts. It's interviewing briefly the people that ought to know and asking them, well, how did Paulie feel about this? Was he the kind of guy that was going to want to fight it out to the end, to the bitter end, give me everything available, and that's probably not enough, find something new? Or was he the kind of guy that said, I've had a good life. You're not going to turn me upside down, open me up like a post-toasties box in an attempt to make this work. So substitute judgment, theoretically, I don't have an issue with it. It just worries me. What's worse is when substituted judgment standard is unavailable, then we look to personal preferences and personal values. A little more comfortable with this, but it's not medical care specific. So instead of asking, well, Paulie, was he a fight to the finish guy, or was he the kind of guy that says, had a good life? This is different. Now you're looking at preferences and personal values, and this is even more problematic in my interest. So what we end up with, if we're not careful, is the best interest standards. And once again, it makes perfect sense. What the doctor or doctors are saying is, we're going to do what's, in the absence of evidence, we're going to do what we think is best for you. What we think the medical issues, how they're best resolved, and whether or not the foreseeable burdens of a proposed treatment exceed the foreseeable benefits. It's that same old balancing thing you do every day when you go to the grocery store. But once again, it's reasonable, and it works in a lot of instances. I just don't trust it. So because I don't trust either standard, either substitute judgment or medical best interest, I'm here tonight to tell you, don't do that. Don't put yourself in a position where you have to rely on either one of those standards. Use the documents that we'll visit about. Use them wisely so your preferences, your decisions regarding medical treatment and care are crystal clear. One of the reasons I'm here tonight is that, for me, legal authority is just very clear. Your documents will either provide legal authority or they won't. And I would dare say, I'd be shocked if every attorney in Galveston's not capable of drafting documents that are perfectly acceptable from a legal standpoint. But that's not why we're here tonight. We're here because there are claims that are made and still made that an instruction directive, that's the one that said, I'll accept this surgery or not, that surgery, the specifics that these like moral authority. Okay, why is moral authority important? Hey, I got legal authority. Why are you going to beat me up with the idea that I need moral authority too? Well, there are instances where the attending physician, the hospital, the insurance group, your family, your best friend has difficulty with the decisions you've made, even though they're ironclad legal. And what happens in some instances is because the moral authority is lacking, now we have people visiting behind the scenes, so to speak, and saying, you know, the fact that Paulie said he didn't want tube feeding under any circumstances, it's reprehensible. He clearly made a mistake. So, and if that's all I do is provide medical treatment decisions in an instruction directive, I'm leaving myself open for that. As long as you're bright-eyed and maybe not quite so bushy-tailed, and you can look the doctor in the eye and say, I don't want this, and even though it will sustain my life, at least for a while, I don't want any more chemotherapy. I don't want any more radiation. As long as you have decisional capacity and you're conscious, not a problem. When on the other hand, your decisional capacity is gone because of dementia or brain injury or extremely high fever, you're leaving yourself open to the people whose I'm sorry, as a Galvestonian, I've been struggling with consonants for better than 70 years. Acquiescence, I think. Don't leave yourself open for that. Those whose acquiescence is important and necessary are much more likely to jump on board the decisions you've made, affirm them, and carry them out, particularly if it involves the rejection of life-sustaining medical treatment, which, as I said, may be more in our future than ever before in our nation's history. If they're persuaded that the decisions have legal and moral authority, you're a lot further along the line. Okay, there are three fundamental claims that say instruction directives, the ones that say, I don't want to be tube fed, I don't want to have my heart started, or attempts to make my heart start if it fails. There are three claims. The first one says, for informed consent, you not only need decisional capacity and freedom, there's no one coercing you, but the information necessary to make a truly informed decision. This claim basically says, you can't do this. If you were that smart, you'd be a billionaire because you can anticipate what the stock market was going to do. And because this information is not available because of the uncertainty of the future, an instruction directive by its very nature has no moral authority. And there's some significance to this argument because things can change that you didn't anticipate. Is this claim accurate? Yes and no. Not necessarily probably the best way to respond. As will be shown, if you pair an instruction directive with an appointment directive, I think you can effectively address the future's uncertainty. That's claim number one. And given the use of both documents, I'm pretty comfortable we can step around that. Claim number two. This one bothers me a lot because it's well-meaning, it's well-intentioned. But this says that the medical best interests of a patient must always prevail, even if that means invalidating the instruction directive. Obviously, the people that are thinking of this weren't brought up in the 50s the way I was and some of you were, when individual rights first arose on a coast-to-coast basis and were affirmed. Once again, it's well-meaning. There are people that can make some pretty awful decisions, and I don't think there's anybody here tonight that could stand up and say, I've never made a really bad decision. They're made. And some of these decisions, when it comes to medical care, really amount to the difference between life and death. And the idea is, wow, okay, well, you have an instruction directive, but you know, we're just going to have to step in and protect you from the consequences of your bad judgment. Is this claim accurate? No. This is, for me, nothing more than old-fashioned paternalism. Doctor knows best. And I'm going to take you back, those of you that are close to my age, I'm going to take you back to your first experiences with doctors. My first experiences with doctors it was difficult because doctors in the 40s and 50s believed, not without some justification, that they always knew what was best. Not only what was best medically, but was best in all theaters of operations. So I'm particularly dubious about doctor knows best. For me, informed consent is a sad, sad deception if it only applies when we satisfy the doctor that we got the decision right based on what that doctor thinks. I'm I guess, a rights advocate, hopefully not a radical rights advocate, but you know, I think by the time you you're in your middle age, at least, you've got the ability to make good decisions for you. Once again, if medical best interests prevail, why not the overall best interest of the patient? Why is the medical best interest, why must that prevail over the overall best interest of the patient? And who knows your overall best interest better than you? No one. And here's two instances where that comes up in the flesh, so to speak. Pain is something that medicine, to the extent that they can do so legally and morally, really want to treat. So doctors are uncomfortable seeing a patient writhing and squirming in pain, and my hat's off to them for that. But there are people whose religion see pain as purification. There are people that say, I'm suffering here so that I don't have to suffer on the other side. I refuse to say that those people don't have the right to endure pain if they so choose. And there are people, and I'm one of them, that if forced to choose between a treatment expensive that would sustain my life for a matter of months and sending a grandchild, that's not gender neutral, sending a grandchild through college, I'm going to choose college for my grandchildren. And I think that's my right to choose. And That's why my overall best interest, in my opinion, trump medical best interest. Okay, hold on to your hats, because this one's gonna be a head scratcher for you. And this flows right out of dementia. And this argument, you know, I don't know whether the people that initially came up with this argument were smoking those funny cigarettes, but it's possible, because their position is, if you're conscious, let's just say you're demented, if you're conscious and yet you have lost a significant part of your memory and mental capacity, then your instruction directive is really an instruction directive of the wrong person. They claim that when that memory and mental capacity is gone, this demented person has become a new person, a second self. I know, it's laughable, but there it is. This second self, the idea is we will have to make medical treatment decisions based on what we perceive, based on the behavior, the countenance, the overall perception of this demented person. We have to look to that. So in my instance, Paulie creates an instruction directive. It says very clearly that, and you will read my instruction directive in the material I'm providing to you if you choose to make it available to you. Paulie says, when I can no longer recognize my family, and when my dementia has deepened to that extent, I don't want to be tube fed. I've had a good life. I'm near the end. Let me go in peace. Well, problem is, if at that moment in time Paulie's in the outside doing jumping jacks, and he's running up and down, and pardon the expression, pinching the nurses on the derriere, the second self people say, now wait a minute, we're not going to tube feed this guy. He's got dysphagia. He can't swallow, but tube feeding, he could stay alive indefinitely. And look, he's as happy as a clam. Well, that's the second self argument that, for me, I totally reject. The sole guide must be what, when looking at how the second self is behaving, and whether the second self has a big smile every day or whether the second self has a frown, that's the determination. Not surprisingly, thank the good Lord, there is no shortage of criticism of this second self concept. And it comes along these lines. Each of you here today have critical interest. You have chosen a pathway of life for yourself. Have decided what things are important to you and what things aren't. It is a travesty having paid taxes, paid insurance premiums, stayed out of the way of the law, paid off your mortgage, and done all those things that you thought were important to you, including deciding when the end comes how you wish to accept or reject medical treatment, for the experiential values or interest of the second self to prevail. I'm of the opinion, and I stand before you tonight to say that you and me and everyone else has the absolute right to subordinate Paulie's interest in pinching the nurses to Paulie's interest in paying for his grandchildren's college education, and not wanting to be tube fed because, in my instance, you may find tube feeding abhorrent. You may have all sorts of issues with tube feeding or with other treatment. For Paulie, you got the right to make the choices, regardless of how your, quote, second self And there's often references to Alzheimer patients wanting to watch the same movie over and over. It just being, imagine, you get to watch Casablanca. When they sing the Marseillaise in Casablanca, you stand up and sing. It's wonderful. You haven't seen the movie. And when Renaud and Claude Rains and Humphrey Bogart walk off and say, this is the start of a beautiful friendship, you get to smile and say, what a great movie. Well, with Alzheimer's disease, you get to watch the same movie over and over again. But for me, much as I might like watching the movie, I have other critical interests that were formed over a lifetime that I think should prevail. Note, for those second self advocates, and I actually hadn't found any in the flesh. They're all over the literature, but as far as meeting any face-to-face, haven't done that. Note that they're single-minded. No one ever suggests that because there's a demented patient who absolutely is head over heels in love with his nurse, that his insurance beneficiary should change, or that his last will and testament should change, just because from an experiential standpoint, this second self, he's found in new places to go with the money. Remember Sandra Day O'Connor's husband, God love him. She was still on the Supreme Court. He was in Arizona. And he fell in love with another person at the Alzheimer's facility. Wonderful. And I know that she was grateful that he was as happy as he was in his last years. But I don't think Sandra Day O'Connor wanted to change anything about insurance policies or last will and testaments because of that. It's my position that when you lose consciousness for an extended period or decisional capacity, the consequences are life-changing. When those are permanent events, the consequences are catastrophic. And if God love you, you had a parent or a spouse or a friend walk down that lonely Alzheimer's road, or because of brain injury, lost consciousness permanently, it's a tough way. So for me, if you frame your advanced healthcare directives based on the possibility of dementia, which is far and away the most likely cause of prolonged impairment of decisional capacity, the guidance provided there is going to be, in my opinion, provided there are multiple documents, and not just one, more than adequate to deal with the issues that are going to arise. So we're going to focus on, for the rest of this, we're going to focus on Advanced Healthcare Directive created in anticipation of the loss of decisional capacity. I'm not raising money for the Alzheimer's Association tonight, but if you live to 85, and there's a good number of you in this room that are probably going to smoke 85, your chances of having dementia are probably 50%. Now, what kind of dementia and how much it'll affect your life, only God knows. But this family of healthcare directives, I think, are what you want. Notice it says directives, and there's a line under the S, because it has to be more than the traditional one document or two. lot of times, and you may be one of those people, your lawyer or you have said, give me the instruction directive. I love my spouse, but she'll be chocolate pudding when it comes to making decisions. I can't depend on that. You don't want to say it where she can hear it or vice versa. Others will say, no, I love my spouse. She can make good decisions on my behalf. We identified the weaknesses of instruction directives. I'm completely convinced that even an instruction directive, carefully conditioned based on events that may or may not take place, is capable of carrying the load. But I admit, that the bar for doing that is admittedly high. So why, Paulie, are you recommending all these directives? Why not just I'm just going to tell my spouse, look, love you very much. We've been through all these years together, raised a mess of kids. We've had a really good life. When the time comes to make decisions, I'm totally comfortable with you making decisions for me. Well, why isn't that a good plan? My experience teaches me, not only what I've seen face-to-face, but in the literature, a lot of times Mama has trouble letting Papa go. And Papa has trouble letting Mama go, even though Mama wanted to go and said she wanted to go. I know you had the experience where you see a funeral, and there's Papa is burying Mama, and there's 3 or 4 kids. Well, it hits the kids hard, but the kids go home to their own lives. Papa has to go home to an empty house. So for me, please don't do that. Please don't expect that your spouse is going to be able to make decisions on your behalf without any guidance other than, I love you, I know you'll make the right decision. That's not an I love you to your spouse that's expected to make those decisions, in my opinion. Okay, getting close to the end now. And now we're getting close to as we would say, at money time. I'm recommending that you have an instruction directive. I'm recommending that you have an appointment directive. But I'm also recommending that you construct a personal statement of values and a personal statement of healthcare goals. Should take you 15 minutes for each. What's a personal statement of values? What do you find important? What's most important to you? Whether it's religious, cultural, flowing out of your roles and understanding. The problem is, if you want your documents to have moral authority, the attending physicians, the hospital, they need more information about you. They need to know more about you. You may decide, I can't pay for medical treatment that the insurance isn't going to cover completely. I'm not going to do it. I worked too hard for my money. I'm just not going to throw it away for 6 months of problematic existence. Why do you need a personal statement of values? Instructions, directives, communicate the what. I don't want tube feeding. I don't want to be resuscitated if my heart stops. But you need to communicate the why. Why don't I want tube feeding? Why don't I want... And it's not hard. Your instruction directive, your appointment directive have the strongest moral authority when it's clear to everyone that they're anchored in your values, what you find important. Your value statement can be short, it can be long. Mine's included in the information I'll send to you if you want it. Am I embarrassed that you're going to find out more about me than you probably would have any interest in otherwise? No, because what you'll discover is my values probably aren't that different than yours. And values don't get talked about enough. To me, it's an important document. Okay, a personal statement of healthcare goals. Now, why in the world are you doing this, Paulie? Wasn't your instruction directive enough? Didn't you say, I don't want to, under these circumstances, don't tube feed me? Or, I need a DNR. I don't want to be resuscitated under these circumstances. Yes, they're in the instruction directive. The problem is, what if your diagnosis, your prognosis, the available medical treatment, those things change? You may, if they told you tomorrow, hey, look, all we have to do is restart your heart one time, and then it'll never stop. Or something that's otherworldly and unimaginable today. Well, your statement of healthcare goals needs to make clear if your physical, mental condition, mental outlook, diagnosis, prognosis change, maybe, not necessarily, but maybe, you'll feel differently about a DNR or tube feeding or chemotherapy or radiation. Once again, you may be willing to consent to tube feeding, but when you know in advance that when your kids come to see you and your wife comes to see you, nothing. That may be sufficient for you to say, don't keep me alive artificially. Don't keep me alive with even though the treatment may be, the benefits of the treatment may be greater than the foreseeable harms and burdens. I don't care. That's the dividing line for me, and you'll see in my personal statement of values, in my personal statement of healthcare goals, where I draw the line. Is that where you're going to draw the line? That's the nice thing about these things. It's your decision and nobody else's. Why do I need a personal statement of healthcare goals if I already have a personal statement of values? Well, your statement provides evidence that you were in possession of adequate information to make an informed decision. Now, why is that going to come into issue? Well, when those people that would tell you that you made bad choices, although you can't understand what they're saying because you're demented or you're unconscious, they may make the argument that, well, this original, although legally this is ironclad and medical treatment and care decisions were made, there's no evidence that the person had decisional capacity or was capable of true informed consent. This helps you with both. You also want to make sure that you've got a statement of values, but your goals, your healthcare goals, should be to maximize their moral authority consistent with your overall medical treatment and care goals. Isn't hard, believe me. If I can do it, I'm a professional fry cook. If a fry cook can make a statement of personal values and personal healthcare goals, trust me, you can as well. Well-drafted, well-crafted, this statement of medical treatment goals allows the person that you appointed in your appointment directive to change what the doctor is going to be instructed to do or not do based on you've given he or she so much more valuable information. Sometimes, not always, the knowledge of your values may not be sufficient. Once again, probably can do it in 15 minutes, but mine's available to you if you want it. Okay, the best way to create these 4 documents is in consultation with your lawyer, doctor, spiritual advisor if you have one, and your family. I have provided a written step-by-step, and it's got many different options. Just recall again, you need a lawyer, obviously you need a doctor, spiritual advisor is up to you. But it's quite possible that your lawyer is going to say, personal statement of values, personal statement of healthcare goals, what are you talking about? Well, that's when you hand them to them. Don't ask them to create them. Here they are. Okay, this is who I am. I will send you the portions of my book that I think are going to be most readable and most enjoyable to you. I will send you this slideshow, and I'm hoping that UTMB, upon request, will send you this presentation in its entirety. Now it's time for questions, and I'll do my best. Yes, sir.
How would you approach the problem that so many people have of being brought into the emergency room in dire straits, bleeding up from the arteries, not breathing, heart stop, and you don't have those papers. You don't carry them in the wallet. And even if you did, nobody's looking at them.
It's certainly true. Remember, what I'm asking for here is to have a fully informed K, Bruce's wife, a fully informed K who, if necessary, can go home and pull out the appointment directive. But she's so much, Bruce and Kay have had this conversation. So not only has Bruce created a personal statement of values, personal statement of healthcare goals, he's also appointed Kay, given her wide discretion to be able to make decisions on Bruce's behalf, including in the emergency room. But there's also an instruction directive that's very specific about just those issues. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have show up at the emergency room with your spouse or whoever is that's why, by the way, this appointment directive. You may not have wild confidence in your spouse's ability to create a cheese omelet. But you be careful choosing someone else. First, you do irreparable harm to your spouse if you choose someone else. That's a blow from which your spouse might not ever recover. But don't put your spouse in a position where she has to guess. And conversations you had about life and death on your honeymoon or when you're watching the Astros win Game 7 against the Dodgers, those aren't enough.
Well, if these documents be registered with, like in our case, UTMB,
The key. Absolutely. There's a bunch of places that you can pretty much store your documents, but too many documents. The principal objection to advanced healthcare directives is nobody pays attention to them. And those that would pay attention to them can't find them. You don't want to have them in a St. Mary's scapula around your neck or with your dog tags, but you want to make sure that as fast as they can, they get into the possession of your doctor. Your doctor needs them, and they may wave you off, but you say, and when you put them in possession of your doctor or doctors, you want to make sure that your spouse makes note of when they were given. You want to make sure you keep a copy on your computer. You want to email. You want to make it so difficult for people to overlook. You spend a lot of time and probably some money creating these documents. You don't want them to be AWOL when the time comes. Lots of options. Yes, ma'am. I created my documents, first time I wrote it, I said, don't feed me. When I've reached a stage where I can't recognize any of my loved ones, and I am basically, I can't remember the specifics, I don't have the document in front of me. When I'm inert, just don't feed me. Removed it, and removed it because I thought it was too much of a burden. Refusing to feed people who are hungry, I just don't think you can do that to the medical staff. That's overreaching what I think individual and personal rights are. What it comes down to, though, eventually, is when you, because of dementia, one of the characteristics, what's going to kill you, by and large, if a truck doesn't run over you, your heart doesn't stop, you're going to basically end up with pneumonia. And the pneumonia is going to arise because you can no longer swallow adequately. And you're going to end up aspirating, it goes down the wrong pipe, into your lungs. Sooner or later, the infections that are produced will be unable, your immune system will be unable, you'll probably deal fine with the first 3 or 4, but at some point you won't be able to deal with that. So it's the careful hand feeding that is the only way that you can temporarily go around dysphagia with a G other than tube feeding. So read what I wrote. You know, I can't, you know, I don't have something in my hip pocket that deals with the issue, but you have to ask yourself, is God paying attention? And I'm sure he or she is and has a plan, but that plan's not revealed to me. As you are well aware, it's very difficult to go to nursing homes. That's tough. And for the people that volunteer, I think they're in a very special place.
On most of the questions, from your answer, we were able to figure out what the question was, but we couldn't hear her question. What was the issue?
Issue is I've rejected tube feeding, but here I am, correct me, here I am in a nursing home, and I'm lost in time and space. No interaction with other inhabitants. Blank stares, but I eat mechanically. Is there any way morally and ethically to deal with that issue? Because prospectively, when I'm creating these documents, I don't want to be that person. What can I do? And the answer is, I have no answer. I'm unable to. I would yield to, what I know about medical ethics. I learned at Dr. Winslade's knee and Dr. Jones's knee, and so I respectfully put the ball back in their court because I'm not capable of answering that. Go ahead.
On one occasion, I was asked to arrange something for somebody in a nursing home. And one of the problems that hadn't mentioned that often happens in nursing homes, when they can't handle it, they call in the gastroenterologist or they send somebody to the hospital. And one of the things that I was able to do for one of my colleagues
Can you turn? I'm not sure. How much are you hearing?
Can you hear me? In a nursing home situation, if you plan in advance with the nursing home, and when somebody gets to the point that they can't eat, one thing you want to be sure to not allow is for the person to be then sent to the hospital where they're going to hook them up to medically administered nutrition and hydration. And I was able to set up an arrangement for a family, for a very demented family member who was very physically strong. But when she got to the point that she couldn't eat, the nursing home simply kept her comfortable rather than calling the doctor or sending her to the hospital. advance with the nursing home. And they're in the business of keeping people fed. And so you have to overcome that sort of resistance. I mean, if you have the kind of documents that Paulie has been talking about, and you have somebody who's going to assert his rights clearly, then you can control the situation. But it's not easy. You have to plan in advance. You have to talk to them. You have to make it clear that you're speaking not for yourself, but for the person that's in the nursing home and what their values are. But one of the things that is amazing is that Paulie has put this together, and I hope all of you take his offer to get the whole packet so you could read it over and see exactly how to go about protecting yourself and also protecting your family from having to throw their hands up and not know what to do.
Lots of ways to say I love you. This is a way to tell your spouse, your children, I love you. I don't want you to have to guess. I want to make certain that you know to the best of my ability what it is I want, what it is I feel like I need, and what specifics I'm capable of providing along those lines.
And your daughter, Colleen, she's the one that's got the strength to do what you said you wanted done.
What he's saying is, in class, we had a conversation about who we would each student would choose. I have she's a pretty strong-willed gal, our daughter, but she's not the appointee. It's my wife. I just can't, come what may. The literature is very clear about be careful about choosing someone else than your spouse.
But it's okay to have a second person.
It absolutely is, but
Particularly if your spouse is dating along with you.
certainly.
And
But you don't want to.
dies first.
What you don't want to have, and I've seen this unfortunately too many times, your ultimate survivors are your spouse and 3 children. 2 of the children are totally comfortable with it's time for you to go, because they're the ones that have been doing the heavy lifting the previous year while you basically, wound down. Your son or daughter that lives in Portland, Oregon shows up ridden with guilt because they haven't participated in this process at all, and they show up and say, we're going to fight with all we got, we're going to fight to the last breath, we're going to do all these things, and everyone turns around and says, where'd this come from? You avoid that by being very specific about who it is that you're appointing. Because then the son or daughter from Portland is powerless. She may beat her mom or dad up about, you're not being fair to my daddy or my mama, but you don't want to come down to a situation where the doctor, because there's no documents, turns to the spouse, then to one of the children and to another child, and ask doctors. They've all experienced some form of that where you go, what do I do? Yes, ma'am. Well, hydration, I know in your family history, there's been conversations about Grandma Sally, great-grandmother Betty, and how they just slipped away. Well, what was it that killed them? Did they have cancer? Well, I don't think so. They had tuberculosis, consumption. No, not that. When you stop eating and drinking, the literature is pretty clear that you die of terminal dehydration. So you can live your body really becomes very efficient at dealing with reduced hydration and nutrition. But it's the hydration, the absence of hydration, that ultimately is it's called terminal dehydration. So one of the great misnomers that we as a society got to get past is, well, they just starved that poor woman. She couldn't eat, and they could have fed her, but they didn't, and they just starved her. Isn't that awful? Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but for me, the literature is very clear that terminal dehydration may be a true blessing in terms of how. Google it. There'll be various articles. For me, terminal dehydration consists of a lot of sleeping and ultimately a very, very peaceful death. That's what happened to Grandma Betty and Great-Grandma Sally.
And Diane Green wrote a book about her husband's experience. He had Parkinson's and he stopped eating.
Yeah.
It's really not a bad.
Takes more courage than I have, but the idea that you could, that's one of our classes, I think it was Dr. Vianney, and one of the books was an exit route for Eddie, and that was the exit. That was the exit. That was the way, relatively painless way to deal with that. I have very specific and very carefully written perspectives on that, but that's something that is outside the scope of this presentation.
Well, I think we all owe Paulie a great deal of applause for getting us to think about something that's very hard to think about and to talk about, and yet not only did he do it, but he's going to give you the recipe. And, that's Gaido.